Good morning. It is Monday, the 29th of June. I'm Maeve McMahon, and this is Europe Today, your morning dose of EU news and analysis. Thanks for joining us. Coming up, tensions temporarily on hold after the US and Iran agree to halt strikes and hold talks in Qatar. This after Tehran said the Strait of Hormuz was under Iranian control and that further US attacks will only escalate the crisis. Over the weekend, it looked like the two countries could be back on the path to war despite signing a memorandum of understanding aimed at ending the conflict. Plus, Europe's early summer heatwave is turning deadly, according to the head of the World Health Organization. More than 1,300 deaths have been linked to extreme temperatures as record-breaking heat continues to sweep across the continent. It comes as politicians debate over air conditioning versus climate action. Meanwhile, trade tensions between the EU and China are back in focus as the Chinese Commerce Minister Wang Wentao meets the EU Trade Commissioner Maroš Šefčovič today in Brussels. EU officials are describing the talks as a, quote, make or break moment for the future of trade relations. And Serbian President Aleksandar Vučić said on Saturday he would be stepping down in the very near future, paving the way for early presidential and parliamentary elections. This announcement comes after 18 months of anti-government protests. But first, the US and Iran have said they will continue their talks in Qatar tomorrow, aimed at ending the Middle East war. This comes after a weekend of strikes that looked to undermine the interim peace agreement and prompted President Donald Trump to threaten violence. Taking to Truth Social, the US president said this weekend, quote, it's very possible that Iran will never learn. There may be a point when we are no longer able to be reasonable. If that happens, the Islamic Republic of Iran will no longer exist. Meanwhile, Lebanon rejected the latest US-Israel-Lebanon framework deal, calling it an agreement of dictates that fails to protect the rights of Lebanese people. For more, we can bring in Osama Rizvi, founder of Rizvi Insights. Good morning, Osama. Thank you so much for joining us. So it was a tense weekend, but now there does seem to be an agreement on the table to talk. Should we treat this announcement, though, with a degree of scepticism?
Well, thank you so much for having me. I think, as we've discussed before, we will see this back and forth, and the MOU will continue to be very fragile in its nature. It has to be like that. But when I look at from a fundamental or practical point of view, even for the US side, the cost of inaction clearly outweighs that of the action. So if they go down further the path of escalation or a war, we will see a host of problems propping up, from US Treasury yields rising to 5%, which has never happened before. And every time they neared 5%, we saw some sort of good news being released into the market. We will see oil prices once again rising up, election year, and so on and so forth. Whereas the cost of inaction would only be a loss of political capital. And if you look at the figures recently, it has already been depleting. So I think a practical and more sane way would be to go down the inaction pathway. And I think that is more probable, hopefully.
And of course, we've seen the last couple of days tit-for-tat exchanges with Iran making it very clear, Osama, that they would be controlling the Strait of Hormuz. What's the biggest risk, do you think, in the next few days?
I think, to borrow Bradford DeLong's word, this whole situation regarding Hormuz is a densely braided Gordian knot. So this ought to have such repercussions that nobody can understand. It will remain, unfortunately, as far as I see from a geopolitical point of view, it will remain under the control of Iran. Nobody will be able to open it from maybe other than diplomacy. But at the same moment, at the same time, I think shipments and tankers will continue to flow because it serves both the sides.
Well, you mentioned that word diplomacy. Is there any realistic chance now for diplomacy?
I think it is. The longer we go on without any serious escalation, the better the chances become of this conflict being resolved through diplomacy. However, we have to look at the past. We have to look at Israel. We have to look at Lebanon. There are so many actors involved. So I think it will remain precarious. It is tenuous. And the situation will keep everyone and all the markets on the edge of their seats.
Very much on their toes. And just regarding the markets, we saw oil prices spiking since the attacks actually resumed. What are you looking out for this week?
Oil prices are actually an oddity at the moment. If you look at the fundamentals, US stocks are at 20 years lowest point. There is no reality in which WTI can be where it is right now. So either oil prices will reassess the risks and rise, or maybe remain range bound. I don't see them following to levels like 40 or 50 anytime soon.
Okay, Osama Rizvi there with his eye on the ball. Thank you so much for your insights, as always. Now, the tension in the Middle East comes as the US celebrates 250 years of independence. Last night here in Brussels, more than 7,000 people were wined and dined in true American style. From hot dogs to mac and cheese, against a backdrop of rodeo games and cheerleaders, the US Embassy pulled out all the stops to dazzle the Belgian capital. The festival, that finished with a fireworks display, came as President Trump threatened to impose a 100% tariff on imports from any European country that levies a digital services tax on US companies. For more, we're joined by our very own Stefan Krobbe. Stefan, never a dull moment really in the EU-US transatlantic tie. What's behind this latest attack?
Yeah, that's right, Maeve. Good morning. Well, Maeve, just when many in Brussels thought that the transatlantic trade dispute had calmed down, Donald Trump has reignited it with one of his toughest threats yet. So the US president says any country imposing a digital services tax on American technology companies could face a 100% tariff on all exports to the United States. And he insists those tariffs would supersede any existing trade agreements. Now, the immediate targets here are European countries. For years, several EU member states, including France, Spain, Italy, have argued that US tech giants such as Google, such as Amazon, Apple, or Meta generate billions of euros in revenue in Europe while paying very little tax. And digital service taxes are designed to make those companies contribute more where they do business, which is actually here. Washington, however, sees these taxes as discriminatory because they disproportionately affect American tech companies. The European Commission has responded defiantly, saying the EU has every right to regulate and tax economic activity within its own market. And Brussels insists its rules are not discriminatory and has warned that it is prepared to respond if Washington follows through on its threat. The timing here is significant, Maeve, because only weeks after the US and the EU reached a broader trade understanding that capped most tariffs at 15%, digital taxation remains one of the most important unresolved issues. And Trump latest warning now risks opening an entirely new front in the transatlantic trade relationship.
And Stefan, meanwhile, of course, that party that took place last night to celebrate 250 years of independence, security, of course, was very tight, but there were protesters gathering nearby. Some NGOs like Greenpeace rolling out banners saying war, greed, energy crisis. What is there to celebrate? Now, of course, the motto of the gathering last night was 250 years of independence, building our future together. Stefan, that sounds almost ironic given President Trump's real feelings for Europe. You were at the party last night. Did you see bad feelings?
Well, maybe you're right. Trump doesn't like Europe. He hates the European Union. And he usually criticizes the EU in much harsher terms than, for example, Russia, China, and North Korea, all countries without a liberal democracy. And on that motto, building a future together, look, it was a garden party to which U.S. embassies in foreign capitals typically invite host country officials and diplomats around the American Independence Day. Only this time it was much, much bigger. And you mentioned it, there were several thousands of what I call Friends of America who were invited, people who in their day jobs deal with the United States one way or the other. And no, I did not register any bad feelings, au contraire, mainly because the organizers kept it apolitical. It was a rather timeless celebration of Americana that people, especially in Europe, love about the country, like line dancing, like mechanical bull rides, like baseball and American football. And because it was so apolitical, people had a good time. America is about more than Donald Trump. And Donald Trump, as president, he is what he is. But throughout American history, there have been presidents who were considered unfit for the job. You know, the James Buchanans, the Andrew Johnsons, the Herbert Hoovers, they come and they go. The same with Trump. So political differences should not stop us from celebrating American values and a friendship that many people on both sides of the Atlantic still cherish and hold dear.
Okay, Stefan Krobbe, and as you said, people had a very good time leaving with bags, of course, of American candy. Thank you so much for your analysis there. Now, moving on, the World Health Organization has said almost 1,300 deaths have been recorded since the deadly heatwave in Europe that began on the 21st of June. This weekend saw record temperatures hit Germany, Czechia, Poland and Hungary, with police in Berlin using water cannons to cool people down and German Rail urging people to cancel their travel plans. For more, we can bring in Carlo Bontempo, Director of the Copernicus Climate Change Service. Thank you so much for coming on Europe Today. Just tell us, how unusual is this heatwave for late June, and can we expect this heat to continue into July?
Well, I mean, what you were describing is the answer to your question in a sense, because the conditions are extremely unusual. We see temperature 10, 12 degrees above the normal averages for France, for part of the UK. We've seen recent days. And as you said, now that the peak of the heat wave is moving east, we are seeing record-breaking temperature affecting Eastern Germany, affecting Czechia and Poland. So this is very unusual. And at the moment, it doesn't necessarily look as the end is near. The peak maybe in Western Europe has been reached, but looking at the forecast, and for the forecast, the National Met Services are the best place to look at. There is not a clear sign for rain coming in or a massive reduction in temperature.
And based on your expertise, is it climate change making these extreme heat events more frequent and more intense?
Well, as always, it's a combination. These events, high-pressure ridges extending over Europe, have existed throughout history. We have seen many heat waves before this one, starting from the famous or infamous 2003 heat wave. But this same weather pattern are now operating in a world that is much, much warmer. And Europe is warming faster than the global average. And we see this heat wave becoming more frequent, more intense, lasting longer, and starting earlier in the season.
And what are the biggest health risks, especially for vulnerable people? We've already seen the deaths that have been announced from this.
Yeah, and there is actually a paper that came out last week from a colleague of ours at the ECNWF, Rebecca Emerton, that was published in Nature. And she looked at the heat stress. And heat stress has gone up all over the globe, not just in Europe. And heat stress is a cause of death for many humans. And actually, the heat-related mortality in Europe, as the Lancet Countdown pointed out a couple of years ago, has gone up 30% in the last 20 years. So having more heat waves means that actually our own risk of facing the consequences of heat stress has gone up very significantly and will continue to go up, unfortunately, as the temperature rises, not just in Europe, but across the world.
OK, Carlo Bontempo, thank you so much for your analysis, as always, and for joining us here on the programme. Now, this latest heatwave that is, as we heard, set to last, has triggered a fiery debate across Europe about the lack of infrastructure when it comes to air conditioning in homes, schools, public transport and workplaces. Europe's air conditioning usage is quite low compared to other continents, particularly North America and Asia, with only around 19% of households having air conditioning here. And in France, we've seen politicians laying the groundwork for their campaigns ahead of the elections next year, seizing upon the air conditioning debate. For more, we can bring in Diana Urgvorst, that's the Vice Chair of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. Good morning. Just tell us, what's your view here on this political debate over aircon for all versus long-term climate policies? Is this just addressing the symptoms and not really the root causes?
Thank you very much. It's a very important question. Not only addressing the symptoms, but in fact really aggravating climate change and aggravating even local warming in the cities. Because air conditioning, what it does is actually puts the local indoor heat out on the streets. It makes the urban heat even worse. And also global warming, because cooling is expected to add 25% more electricity demand until 2030 than even data centers, which means that if we only compare to artificial intelligence, this is about 5 times as much. We talk a lot about the energy from artificial intelligence, but not so much from cooling. At the same time, of course, it is very important that we are providing thermal safety to our residents, because heat is killing in Europe. It can kill as much as 40 to 60,000 excess deaths, so people in a hot summer all over Europe. So it is crucial. But I would consider more taking the Swiss approach, which means that we provide access, allow access to the elderly, all the vulnerable groups, and otherwise we try to implement measures that in the few really extreme days, such as what we are experiencing now in some countries, and some countries are already over, we'd rather take temporary measures to provide safety, for example, in cooling centers during those days, which happen just a few days about every year. So far, for a while, it will really only hurt us a few days every couple of years. But then we have to take these measures, for example, cooling centers, or also have to accept that perhaps there will be temporary reductions in productivity, and perhaps home officing and other measures can help in these difficult situations.
And I'm not sure if you've seen, but the European Commission is under criticism for turning off the AC for some of its staff and leaving it on for others higher up in buildings. I guess this shows really the wider problem we have across Europe, as you're describing, regarding access.
Exactly. So access to air conditioning is a crucial issue. At the same time, it is also, again, important that to understand that the solution is not universal access to everywhere, everything, because right now, exactly the very reasons why it had to be turned off is because of capacity shortages. And if we suddenly try to provide access to everyone, that means that our capacities won't be able to survive, because we are now already jeopardizing the success of the green energy transition, because what we see is that we are now adding more energy demand that we are able to provide with new sources of renewable power, despite our unexpected success with the deployment of renewable energy sources. But certainly, of course, it doesn't mean that the elites of the elites will have to have access and the others don't. So we do have to look at everyone's needs. But again, I do believe that perhaps temporary measures where everyone has a temporary arrangement for these few days to get by and still be able to work, but even more to be able to stay healthy, is more important than the solution to have full access immediately to everyone to air conditioning. Because the problem is, once you have access to air conditioning, the culture also changes. We have a lot of cultural adaptations to hot days and how we get by in heat, and we would lose all of this if we suddenly have all air conditioners.
Okay. Diana Erdvor says thank you so much for your insights there and for joining us. And now it's time for an update on the FIFA World Cup results. Well, it was a busy weekend with matches, with Austria qualifying in dramatic fashion after a 3-3 draw with Algeria on Sunday morning, becoming the last European team to book a place in the knockout stage. 3 of the 16 teams heading home after the group stage are European: Czechia, Scotland and Turkey, with Turkey's exit probably the biggest surprise. That means 13 European teams are still fighting for glory. From now on, there are no more excuses. Meanwhile, after host nation Canada secured their place in the round of 16 last night, Germany and the Netherlands are both in action tonight. The Mannschaft takes on Paraguay, while another blockbuster will of course be Netherlands versus Morocco at 3 a.m. With a large Moroccan community in the Netherlands, the stakes are high. Firebrand politician Geert Wilders added to the tension by posting a photo of himself dressed as a referee, showing Morocco a red card. Also on the menu, Brazil versus Japan at 7. May the best teams win. But that brings this edition of Europe Today to an end. Thank you so much for your company. As always, of course, you can go to euronews.com for more news and analysis, or you can drop us a line at europetoday@euronews.com with your feedback. Take care, see you soon, and stay with us on Europe News.